Hey, Michelle, if it's okay with you, I'll start with some Zoom housekeeping.
You bet. Go for it.
Awesome. So thank you everyone for joining tonight from Michele Chalice's Keep Your Leaves presentation. We are recording tonight's Zoom. And as I mentioned in the chat, I will send out tomorrow to everyone who registered for this evening's presentation. Also, please feel free to utilize the chat here. I'm happy to forward questions to Michele throughout the presentation. Also, if you don't mind just leaving your sound off in order to help with any background noise. As you can probably hear where I am, there's tons of background noise. So I am also gonna keep myself on mute. And so we are recording tonight's session. We're asking to keep yourself on mute. And if there isn't any questions before we begin, Michele, if you want to take it away.
All right. Terrific. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. My name is Michele Chalice, and I am an environmental landscape designer. I came to Keene in 2006 to raise my now teenage daughter, but as you can tell from my language, I am from the Midwest, where I was a licensed landscape architect and natural resource planner, particularly in Wisconsin for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree in LA. You'll see that I'm a bit obsessed with gardening, ecology, as well as home energy efficiency. My little consulting company, Healthy Home Habitats, allows me to combine these skills and interests, working with people in our region to learn about small climate actions that they can do every day from home for fabulous landscapes. So keep your leaves. I'm so excited to take you through an exploration of this natural resource that our shade trees grow all summer long and gift us with each fall. So fall leaves, right? You must admit, they pretty magical. They can smell crisp on a cool day and sound wonderful as we crunch through them in the forest. So why are we here? And I bet at the back of your mind, you know what your biggest problem is with fall leaves. But I'm happy to start. For a long time, we have referred to our fall leaves as leaf litter or yard waste. We put them in trash bags to be taken away. And for many of us, we feel that there are just too many leaves and that it takes us way too long to rake and pile, get rid of them, bring them down to the curb, whatever. So what's the worst case scenario in this circumstance? I would suggest that it is this. When they're wrapped in plastic, no one gets to use these leaves or their benefits wrapped in plastic. They sit in a landfill, much like they are here for hundreds of years. Now that said, I'm going to mention the caveat for black plastic, which is the best way to safely dispose of any disease leaves you have from the season. We had quite a bit of bacteria this year, and or invasive plants. So something to keep in mind. So how did we come to this? Leaves have been very happy on the forest floor through millennia, right? No raking or removal needed. Native plants grow through fallen leaves just fine and dandy. But as you know, we don't have so much forest floor anymore. We do have so many more driveways, streets, sidewalks, and lawns, and leaves are not helpful on these surfaces. So leaves on pavement, as I'm sure you may have experienced, they're a slick tripping hazard. We don't want them on pavement. And how about the lawn? I bet you most of you know that we can't leave leaves whole on the lawn. And that is specifically because our non-native lawns are not adapted to leaf cover. And so they're subject to snow mold fungus when they're left whole in that state. So that doesn't work. And in the street as well, because of course they flow to the street drains, right? Then they reduce the capacity of our street drains. And as many of you may have experienced, they often clog these drains in the event of a storm. And this has been a major contributing factor to flooding in Keene in the past. So we'll use Keene as an example, though. Communities, as with other municipalities in the nation, Keene turns their leaves combined with lawn clippings into a fabulous composted mulch. So let's look at that process. We, as homeowners, rake those leaves down to the curb, hopefully not blow them. Trucks, lots of them, transport leaves from the curb to, in Keene's case, our transport station. And then huge machines grind and turn that mountain of material several times throughout the winter. And maybe, can I ask, has anybody been by to see that pile steaming through the winter? It's pretty amazing. And that's a good thing. That heat that is being evidenced by the steam is killing weed seeds, because we as Keene residents get to go back and get that lovely compost and bring it home. This year, in fact, the city of Keene actually ran out of this lovely compost. I went to go get some and it was all gone. Now, yes, it does still have little bits of glass and plastic. You've got to wear gloves. I have to admit I don't, and I would suggest that it not be used on vegetable gardens because people use pesticides, herbicides, and petrochemical fertilizers on their grass clippings, and those are combined, at least in Keene, to make this mulch. So how many leaves, right? Too many to describe is how Keene's Assistant Public Works Director, Duncan Watson, answered regarding how many leaves Keene generates. A mountain of leaves in our particular circumstance, and hundreds of trucks carry these leaves to Keene's transfer station from the curbs every year. Well, that doesn't happen by magic, right? Our tax dollars pay the staff salaries, the gas, and the resource time to make this Herculean effort every year. Worse yet, there's severely limited landfill space here and throughout the nation. Nobody wants a new landfill in their community. And nationally, 8 million tons of leaves go into landfills still each year. That's a problem. So I'm going to stop periodically throughout this presentation because I find that I have a question in the moment. And I want to make sure that if you have a question in the moment, you have the opportunity to ask a question about the topics that we just covered. So we don't have to stay here long. If somebody doesn't have a question, we'll just keep moving along. But does anybody, by chance, have a question on these particular topics that we just covered? No? And people have they can unmute themselves. Okay. All right. So if this current system for handling leaves works just fine for you, my plea is simple. Please just don't blow your leaves or pay someone else to blow your leaves, as this so-called landscape management task is crazy destructive. Gas-powered leaf blowers emit, you can see here, nearly 300 times the amount of air pollutants as a pickup truck for the same time period. They actually account for 5 to 10% of the total US emissions of carbon monoxide in our country. That's nuts. And they're crazy loud, as you might have noticed on a Sunday morning. Not only do they disturb people in general, but they've been proven to raise blood pressure and exacerbate bronchitis. The folks who do this for a living have ear damage. They have hearing damage from this 80 to 90 decibels for the loudest ones. And all leaf blowers throw up pollutants, mold spores, dog poop, and pesticides back into the air. That's not a good thing. Aggravating allergies and asthma. There are cities and states throughout the nation that are finally banning or at least regulating gas-powered leaf blowers. And what about electric leaf blowers, you might ask? Well, many of us know the science. All leaf blowers blow unhelpful things back into the air, and almost as importantly to me, all leaf blowers destroy pollinators. So what are the other wildlife benefits of leaving leaves? Luna moths, swallowtails, disguise cocoons. You can see these on the left here. These are actually cocoons with dried leaves, blending into what we often rake away. It's just not possible to be able to see these to avoid them. And the majority of butterflies and moths overwinter in our leaves that have fallen. They've fallen from the trees where they fed as larvae, cocoons, and chrysalis. These leaves are also food for the hungry caterpillars when they break dormancy in the spring. So would you be able to see this butterfly and differentiate it from leaves, trying to stay away from it? And let's talk for a minute. There are particular host plants that butterflies and moths use for their feeding and for their gestation per se. Unfortunately, they're not just native shade trees. They do predominate. Our keystone species in our area are native species of oaks and cherries, our host plants for over 500 Lepidoptera, or butterfly and moth species. But there are lots of other plants that these particular butterflies and caterpillars are using. Chokecherry is a fabulous one. Blackberry, raspberry, sumacs, elderberry, blueberry, and alder. So these critters are using all of those leaves and then dropping down into them. And I would propose that and suggest or point out that these spring hatching caterpillars are valuable for our baby birds, especially in the circumstances where there's been no chemicals used, because, as you may know, we have lost 3 billion birds since 1970. That's really hard to believe, but we know now from these studies, as you can see the image here, that a crowdsource looked at finding what types of pesticides were inside the nests, which we don't see inside those nests, they're up high. And when we as citizen scientists actually go to do the numbers, these are the kinds of things that they're finding in those nests. So we need those caterpillars. We need them for the best snack. They're the most condensed form of protein and nutrients for baby birds. And they're necessary food sources for spiders, worms, beetles, millipedes, chipmunks, birds, and amphibians. The whole shebang. Bumblebees. Can you see where the nest is here? Bumblebees burrow underground, and they need these leaves for extra protection from the cold. You might know that 3 of the state's most important bumblebee species have experienced drastic declines. We've got the particular rusty patch is locally extinct in New Hampshire, and the others have declined by 96% and 71%. So I would guess that their nest is to the lower right. I bet you might too, but we're not going to be able to see that when we're out in our yard deciding what to do about our leaves. And maybe we could think about the leaves below at least the native shade trees as butterfly babies' nests. and just leave them, particularly completely alone under tree canopies. Now, you can see the picture on the left here. While there are many reasons that this tree is failing, having the nutrition and moisture holding capabilities of its own leaves as a mulch would be a better way to help this tree be more healthy, as you see leaves do in more forested settings. And have you ever wondered, doggone it, why do deciduous trees drop their leaves every fall? Well, leaves are like trees' power generators. You probably remember this from school. They create energy from sunlight from spring to fall, but they need water to do this. Evergreen needles have a waxy coating so that the water doesn't freeze, but deciduous leaves do not. And so trees cut off their generators each fall, wishing that their nutrients would be recycled as they had evolved to do. The leaves drop down and go right back into that tree's roots as nutrients. So let's check in with the reality. To flip our perspective, the Farmer's Almanac states that leaves are actually fall's most abundant crop. And did you know that the leaves from just one large tree hold as much as $50 worth of plant and humus? Now, humus, let's talk about humus. It is defined as the dark, rich part of earth formed from a decaying material. Now, that may not sound very appealing, but it contains all those elements necessary for plant growth. And it's a huge factor for our region's thin soils, predominantly sandy with pockets of clay, right? Neither of which hold moisture in a way that plants can use. And in a time of increasing droughts, holding moisture is becoming increasingly important. So let's take a minute and go a little bit deeper in this notion of mulch. And wood mulch versus leaf mulch, they both hold moisture. Wood mulch actually holds it for longer because it's much more dense and heavy. Leaf mulch is light and has more oxygen going through. So wood mulch allows less of that rain to go through it and less plants, which we like. Leaf mulch allows lots of rain to go through and still blocks that sunlight for weed seed. Wood mulch provides no nutrients. It is a carbon source, but it's not live, it's fiber. Leaf mulch provides many nutrients. It is very recently live, and wood mulch is created, I don't know if you know, obviously from trees, but increasingly it's created from breaking down shipping pallets because we have lots of them, right? And sometimes those are painted, and more importantly, we can't see the stamp that was on that pallet as to whether they were treated with preservatives to help that pallet last as long as it can. Leaf mulch, on the other hand, is busy providing important soil microorganisms, particularly bacteria and fungi, whereas the wood mulch doesn't have any bacteria and fungi unless in the very unique circumstance that the wood mulch has been created from tree branches an inch caliper or less, because there's still a lot of the xylem that transports all the nutrients. Wood mulch decomposes slowly, and leaf mulch decomposes more quickly. Okay, that was quite a bit of information. How about any questions here on these particular topics? By chance? No? All right. Landscaping budget. Let's talk about money for a minute. Oh my goodness. Many of us, do we even try to make a budget? Landscape management in general can be very expensive and can often feel just like this image, that money is just needed a lot. And I don't know about you, but I am thrifty. Maybe this picture on the right looks similar. But fall trees offer us free, attractive mulch, trace minerals, the brown carbon, which we can use as well in our compost bin as other things. We've mentioned the nutrients for soil microbes, which breaks down the minerals into elements that the plants can take up, improved moisture retention, weed suppression, and protection from winter's drying winds. And I wonder if you know, pound for pound, leaves contain twice the mineral content of manure, which I found to be surprising. So maybe if you don't want to work quite as hard as raking, dragging, and bagging all of your leaves to the curb, there are several less strenuous options. You can mow them into your lawn. Yes, it's lawn, but we'll talk about how that is all right. You can shred them, you can pile them, or you can compost them. Those are options that, that we'll look at in a little bit more detail. So, and they revolve around some of the considerations that each of us has in our own circumstances. When do you need the benefits of these leaves? Do you mind seeing a pile of leaves over the winter? Some people do, some people don't. Some people have the space for that, some people don't. And so how much space do you have available? Is your priority decorative mulch? Because in many cases it is, or plant nutrients? And that's an important factor. So let's take them one by one. Number one, mowing the leaves into your lawns. And once again, I'm going to qualify preferably outside your tree canopies. Researchers at Michigan State University have shown that lawns benefit from thin layers of shredded leaves. The leaf improves soil, lessening the need for fertilizer in the spring. That's a good thing, right? But you have to mow frequently. They recommend setting your mower at the highest setting and mowing once a week while the leaves are falling. This is my very small electric mower on the left here. It is not a mulching mower, and you'll see that it does just fine. Even the New York Times is now advocating for mowing leaves at home instead of shredding them to the landfill, instead of sending them to the landfill, because the shredding breaks them down into smaller pieces. So let's talk about that shredding for a minute. We know we can't leave the whole leaves on lawns. And so shredding increases the leaf surface area, speeding up the release of nutrients. Shredded leaves stay put. They don't blow away, which is awfully nice because there's less surface area for the wind to pick up and move it. Shredding reduces the leaf pile size by up to 95%. That's a lot. And that leaf blanket traps moisture, repels the sun's rays to cool the soil temperature, and protects the plants once again from the drying winter winds. We don't get so much snow anymore. That snow used to be an insulating blanket, but we don't have it. Shredded leaves can be mixed directly into the garden soil, and they'll release their nutrients as they decompose. And it can be done in several ways. So once again, for those of us who are frugal, I'll say frugal fanatics, we have multiple benefits from just one action, this notion of shredding our leaves. So what's the best way to shred the leaves? I've tried a bunch of methods, and we'll look at each for your information. You can use your own mower, you can get fancy, and there are a couple not so safe options that we'll take a look at. And we'll talk about which leaves, right? You can just pull those leaves back from your walkways because that's where they're the hazard, right? And in this particular circumstance on the left, the rest are planting beds. So that is enough. What we're trying to do, once again, is stay out of that leaf cover underneath those shade trees where those butterflies and caterpillars are overwintering. So number two, you can use your own mower. Once again, this is my teeny tiny little mower, electric one. And you can see the leaves are not completely dry. Dry is easier, but you can see the moisture in these. And then it's also not the lightest covering of leaves. I'd say they're an inch, inch and a half here on the far left. And then you can see what they're shredded into. This particular method is cheap. You set your mower at the highest setting, as we mentioned before. It's safe because we use our mowers all the time. We know how to do that. And it's not physically difficult. But the catch is that it needs to be done weekly. You're not going to have a lot of success trying to mow your way into a huge pile. I guess it would be entertaining. So how about vacuum shredder? Getting a little bit fancy here. This one is a corded one. I haven't used this particular type. I have used this Vac Attack, and I found it very easy to use, but it's a little bit heavy. You're carrying this bag that's kind of wonking back and forth underneath. It's battery powered, which is lovely, very satisfying. And it has a fairly large bag, and you can see the lovely mulch that it creates here. These are linden blooms, not actually leaves, but they'll happen in a little while, and it's gorgeous. I find it to be great fun, very satisfying, and a lovely mulch. They now, this year, of course, I went to go try, also getting fancy, have a push vacuum or shredder. And so it is both, and I find it much easier to use. It's a little bit more expensive. It folds up in half, so it doesn't take up very much space at all. You can see it in relationship to the car side there. It's easier. It's easier to push, and you're not carrying the bag, but it is a smaller bag, and it also creates a very fine mulch. You can also try a string leaf shredder. I have one. I've tried two. They're less expensive, $30 to $100. They're bulky to store. They're safe because they're a string trimmer, safer than a blade, but they are loud and dusty. As far as I'm concerned, you must have protective glasses. I find them frustrating because there's always going to be little sticks, and the cord that you're using to shred the leaves breaks often and has to be replaced, and you have to take the whole thing apart on the side. So I'll qualify this as not such a great idea or way to shred leaves. I'll grant you, definitely less than $100. It's easy to store. A string trimmer can be hung, not very much. Everybody has an extra trash can, but it's really loud and dusty. It's crazy dangerous for the eyes. There are things flying all over the place. Let alone, it's physically difficult to be pushing that string trimmer down through those leaves, through the bottom. So I would not recommend that at all. So piling leaves whole. This is number 3 on our options. Remember, we had number 1, mow the leaves into your lawn outside the tree canopies. Number 2, shred the leaves from all your paved surfaces and lawn. And number 3, now for those who are in no rush and have the space for larger piles or bins. This is the easiest one of all, folks. I'm sure you can imagine that. Much easier than the other options. All it has to be done is put in a pile. You can use them to smother grass for a new garden the next season. I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of peeling back turf anymore for a new garden. So they work great for that. And just sitting there, they rot all by themselves. They're a bit slimy for a while. They end up creating what's called leaf mold, which is kind of an offensive term, but accurate. Now, if a pile is a little bit too loose and goosey, you can contain them in a chicken wire circle, which is really easy to do. There are very specific dimensions here, which I don't feel are necessary per se. But you need the chicken wire, you need some zip ties, you need 2 stakes so that they can be on either end, and this metal, hopefully metal netting, plastic netting if you already have it and you need to use it for something else. And once again, it will do its thing over time with the moisture that's provided. by rain and with the microbes. It will break down all by itself. So how about number 4, composting? Well, this is the way that we provide the broadest range of nutrients and microorganisms for our vegetables, our flowers, everything, because we're not only mixing the browns of the leaves, but all our grass clippings and our vegetables. But you probably know that compost piles need to be well located. They have to have enough sun so that they are heating up the internal components that needs to be hot enough to destroy both bacteria, pathogens, and weed seeds. Now you can add manure to accelerate the breakdown process and add additional nutrients as well. I would suggest doing that in the fall. So you've got all winter. You don't want to be putting hot manure down in your gardens, and it gives you time to mix that all in. But a healthy compost, whew, that's a joy to behold. It has all of the nutrients, or so many more of the nutrients that we need to grow nutritious vegetables and have that humus for holding moisture. And come on, who doesn't want to have better vegetables, right? It's great fun. Let alone if you've got time available, it's great fun to play with how you do this, right? These are sculptural elements. You can see they have the same components of the mesh to allow for a lot of oxygen exchange and for that moisture to get in there, as well as the microbes. And it happens over time. So let's talk for a second. Let's go back to that shredded. What do you do with all these shredded leaves? And look at those options. Well, I don't know about you, but I find this to be gorgeous mulch. I use it in all of my beds. You are never going to find a wood mulch that has this variation of colors in it. It is just gorgeous when the rain hits it, and is, I just think, a wonder to behold. All of my garden beds, all of the vegetable beds, let alone the compost bin. And in particular, one of the important aspects, I don't know if you've had the experience, but putting in the greens all winter long to your compost bin without the browns, you end up with quite an interesting spring slime. So you might be able to see in the right picture at the back, there's a black plastic bag. I keep that there with whole leaves throughout the winter to be able to add every time I put vegetables into the compost bin and prevent that slime. I'm not a big fan of that slime. How about here? Mowing leaves into the lawn, shredding leaves?
Michelle. Yes, we have a great question in the chat. It's kind of a long one, so I don't want to miss it or miss anything. Jeff has asked, under trees, are whole leaves as healthy for the trees as mulched leaves? And by allowing leaves to accumulate under deciduous trees, are we trading off tree health for a bit of lost lawn health? And in a perennial garden, does it matter whether or not the leaves are shredded or left as they fall? Sorry.
Okay, so we've got 3 questions there.
Yes.
First one was, wait a minute, whole? Tell me the first one again.
Oh, sure. So under trees, are whole leaves as
so whole
healthy
leaves
for the
whole
trees
leaves
as mulch leaves?
under trees? No, that's not a problem. For the tree, whole leaves are going to break down, and we'll talk about the different types of leaves and at what rates they break down. But the tree is adapted, it's evolved to be able to have that process happen right under its canopy. That said, it's not the place to dump all of the leaves from your lawn. The tree is going to be just fine with the leaves that has fallen underneath it, but you don't want to make this huge pile from everything else from your lawn. And the tree does not need the leaves shredded. I'll put a caveat there that many of us have put spring bulbs, decorative bulbs under our trees, and that is a little bit more of a challenging circumstance because the leaves especially oak leaves, take a while to decompose, and they can mat over each other. And in the short term, prevent some of the moisture from coming through and impede the bulbs that are coming up. So without bulbs, absolutely not. The tree is just fine with whole leaves as it's been evolved to do. It doesn't need them shredded, but not to pile the entire yard. The perennial beds, we're going to talk about that with the leaves. I prefer to have them shredded in the perennial beds just for a couple of the reasons that we'll talk about in a minute. Did I get them all?
I think there was one more, maybe you answered it. And by allowing leaves to accumulate under deciduous trees, are we trading off tree health for a bit of lost lawn health?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
The trees want their leaves and they want the ones that fell from their branches. So no, we're not trading that at all. And let's go straight to that point, right? Which leaves are best? It's a perennial question. And you might be happy to know that sugar maple leaves happen to have the highest fertilizer value in our area. They're one of our favorite local trees. Whereas black walnut and butternut, you might know, contain a natural herbicide that's in their roots that keep other plants from competing with them. And so those nutrients are also in their leaves. Though it doesn't last forever. All right, the decomposition process breaks down that natural herbicide, but it's best to put those leaves into the compost where they'll have the whole winter to decompose. Eastern hemlock needles are high in nitrogen, as you might imagine, and pine needles are fine and light. They can be used anywhere. And let's dispel that myth that pine needles will increase acidity. It seems logical, right? I have to admit, early on, I used to dump pine needles in with my blueberries, but once again, that decomposition process neutralizes acidity within a period of, I think, a month or so. Oak leaves, they are the thickest and they are the toughest with tannins, which can be challenging, as I said, in areas where we want the bulbs to come up, but when you shred them, you're fine again. And even as a shredded mulch, they make a much longer lasting mulch because they are tougher. They've got those tannins in there. So let's talk about a couple be sure tos. We mentioned do not use the city's or municipal leaf mulch on vegetable gardens due to the fact that people use all kinds of things in their grass, and you don't want those things to be growing into the vegetables that you use or decreasing the growth rate of your perennials because they are there. And we don't want to mix or dispose of our diseased leaves within our mulch. They do have to go in that black plastic because our residential mulches do not get up to the temperature needed to break down those bacteria. And even the municipal mulches don't want diseased leaves. It's just not a good idea. Also, keep that shredded mulch around the shrubs, trunks, and stems. Do not pile that mulch against the tree bark. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Don't cover the ground cover either. You don't want to be on top of the plants. You can see that this person is using a broom to, they did put the shredded leaf mulch down on top, but they're using the broom to make sure it goes below those leaves. Nice, gentle process, and you get a great blanket of mulch. For the perennials, as was asked, you do want to make sure that I prefer the shredded leaf mulch. I've used the whole, but I have too many bulbs in with my in my planting beds, and so I want them to come up easily. And that mulch has to be around the perennials. You will rot the plant if you put it right on top of the crown of the plant because it's decomposing, right? And we don't want it to decompose with the actual plant itself. And let's go back to this topic again. Incorrectly applying mulch around a tree against its trunk severely compromises its health. Here's Texas A&M Forest Service trying to dispel this myth, how my friends think it should look, how the society thinks it should look, how the landscapers think it should look, right? We see this all over. Keen, goodness gracious, how your neighbor thinks it should look. But the reality is, bark is not meant to have moisture against it, and you are severely compromising the health of that tree by having that mulch up against it. You can see an example here of a recent client who planted a ginkgo tree right in the middle of the summer. So it's feeling a little bit stressed. You can tell by the little branches at the bottom and the yellowing leaves. And so I asked them to go back and put down some mulch. They did not have shredded leaf mulch, but he did a great job making almost like a pancake. And he actually has a horseshoe shape to an outer edge because there's a slope there, so that when the moisture comes down that slope, it is held in a ring around where the roots will be, not up against the trunk. So I'm going to ask you to consider neighbor relations, because not everybody does things the same way, right? This is a picture of a fabulous native garden by Benjamin Vogt, who is a amazing writer and gardener with a company called Monarch Guard. And his particular yard, which is shown in the yellow oval, is quite the mix. This is a fall photo of the gorgeous golds and beginnings of the chestnut browns, a diverse mix of native species. It's only needs to be mowed once a year in the spring after the winter has passed. There's no watering that needs to happen here, no fertilizing or pesticide use, but it's in the middle of an entire neighborhood, which is circled in the blue, of folks who still have regular turf grass, and they can find that quite concerning, right? They may find it confusing, but we don't want to miss an opportunity, let's say. And so what I would suggest is signage. You have the ability to use signs to keep your neighbors not only aware of your approach, but they get new information to consider. This first one is a garden that I use with my clients to help them explain what's going on. Not just messy with crushed leaves, it's healthy. And the following reasons are why. All of those reasons, let alone you have the Wild Seed Project out of Maine with a fabulous example that talks more about the blowing too, and why. The sustaining of the birds, the protecting of the overwintering pollinators we've talked about, the insulating of the plant roots as well from our dry winds, and the building of living soil. Healthy Backyards is a fabulous group as well, and they're not only asking you to leave the leaves, but they're explaining that not only the leaves, but wood and grassy stalks are all a pollinator haven. So I would suggest that you get to relax a little bit, enjoy the season. Leaves are nature's fertilizers. They're rich in nutrients. They're an effective mulch, and once fully decomposed, are extremely beneficial for our thin soils. They're free, and we only need to modify these leaves from their form and how they've done it over the millennia, because we're not using them for forest floors. So my name is Michele Chalice, and I am designing ecologically friendly landscapes, holding workshops and programs like this in the Monadnock region. Please feel free to email me to hear of the latest events, and I thank you for your time. I hope I provided a little bit of information that will be helpful for you this year and in the years to come.
Hey, Michele, would you be willing to take one more question?
Oh my gosh, we have lots of time. Absolutely.
Or of course, if there's other questions, I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
So we have one more question in the chat. It says, we have trees that shed leaves into our perennial beds. Should we leave them or rake them and shred them?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the size of the perennials. you know, if they're very small leaved perennials, a stilby per se, that are potentially going to be covered by those leaves, you know, the catch is to make sure, whichever you do, leave the leaves whole or do the shredded, to make sure that those leaves are not completely covering the perennials, and you know where your perennials are. So if the perennials have a lot of space between them and it's reasonable and you want it to look more formal and not blow around so much. You know, one of the reasons that I love shred leaves the most is that I want that. I want that mulch. I don't want it to blow away. And if you leave them whole, you run the risk of them blowing away, let alone moving. So it's a little bit of a judgment call as to how you'd like to handle that. It seems like an awful lot of work to pull them out of a bed. I've never done it. I've never pulled them out of my bed to shred and then put back. But if you know you've got lots of little bulbs coming up in the spring and you're dealing with oak leaves, you might want to consider it. But the other thing to do, though, is to just keep an eye. And in the spring, after the snow is gone, use a rake to just loosen those whole leaves up. And you'll be accomplishing mostly the same thing. So that's what I tend to do, is I just bring a rake out in the very early spring and loosen up in case they have plated down over each other, because I want to make sure that moisture gets through there.
We have another question in the chat from Jane, who's asking, how do I know if leaves are diseased?
Oh, well, number one, you'll see them on your plants, right? You'll see them, they'll have spots on them. We're seeing, this year was a really rough year for all of the crab apples. There was so much blight. So they're brown, big brown spots. All of the horse chestnuts as well have had a lot of blight this year. So you'll know when they are actually on the plant. Once they get down to the ground, you don't have to worry about spots that happen after they get down on the ground. That's kind of part of the decomposition. But up on the trees, when you see large brown spots, then you're going to know. And it's a little bit hard, right? I mean, you're not going to go up on the tree and take the leaves off, but you'll know. Crab apples, the horse chestnuts in particular, are the plants that I've noticed the most this year. And it just means that when I go to those particular plants, I'm going to pull those leaves and put them in a bag. Anything else?
I just had Michael comment, that's where the vacuum bagger comes in great. It gets all those big leaves out of the beds.
Aha, there you go. That's a good idea. I haven't done that yet, but I'll have to think about that. There you go. There you go. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'll be sending out the recording tomorrow early in the afternoon for everyone who registered.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. I appreciate it. Have a great evening. I hope you're in for the evening. It is quite stormy out there, but I tell you, I'm grateful for the rain. This is a great time to get our plants settled before the winter starts and make sure that they are hydrated. So have a wonderful rest of the evening and a great fall.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I just like to hang on, Michelle. I don't know why. It's a weird thing. I just like to make sure everyone.
Well, and it's kind of
Able to
nice to
log
just
off.
touch base, because
Yeah.
if there's something that happened during the presentation that I might not be aware of, it's a great time to catch me right away.
I don't, we had really good attendance, higher than, typically, let's say 20 people RSVP for a workshop, you're gonna get about 40% usually is
Okay.
your attendance rate, or at least what I've seen in the time here.
In general.
So we had between 13 and 15 people. Some came and came back,
Okay.
which I thought was pretty good.
Yeah.
So I don't think anything specific. I thought your presentation was great. I thought it was a little bit easier to follow than the last one. I don't know why. Maybe the
Interesting.
information was just a little bit more condensed down. I could
Okay,
be
good.
making that up. I don't know. But
No, yeah, actually, I did spend quite a bit of time. Is it helpful to break up the questions, or is
Yeah.
that not helpful? You
I
think so?
I think it's helpful because it's a lot of content in an hour, right?
Yeah,
And we are in a virtual platform. So I think splitting it up to allow folks an opportunity to sort of think through what chunk of information you just gave them is really, really smart. So I would say keep on doing that.
okay. It really depends on the presentation. I have to admit, the last one, we went to an hour and a half because people just had so many questions throughout. So it
Yeah.
really runs the gamut. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity. I really
Yes.
do. It's fun to be able to share this information. Hey there, how are you?
Hi, Michelle. He Zoom bombed us. Yeah.
Right? Our digital world.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, we'll
Awesome,
be in
Michelle.
touch. We've got another one to do in mid-November.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
okay.
Awesome.
And we'll see how it goes.
We'll
We'll
chat
talk to you
soon.
later.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.